So this is actually, so Cliff's presentation is a pretty perfect segue into what I want to talk about rather, and I say we is the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, because I think that most of you are quite aware that since the inception of the commercial internet, guaranteeing both performance and reliability at a competitive cost has been one of the greatest motivators for hardware providers, right? And of course you see performance plus reliability divided by competitive cost equals happy customers. But of course, when IT hardware was significantly improving from one cycle to the next, the reliability gained via performance and efficiency improvements of new hardware models made sense from a business point of view. But things are changing. And of course, cue the stereotypical Moore's Law chart. Performance increments are not nearly as noteworthy as they used to be. Hardware improvements have plateaued. So customers now, as Cliff described, or as he alluded to rather, are demanding more sustainability and more sustainable solutions rather. So with this in mind, and considering the recent deacceleration of Moore's Law, as well as the generational performance improvements of servers having, well, in our opinion, long faded, it really begs the question, why haven't upgrade cycles been prolonged as well? So the answer is simple, and I'm sure many of you know this, and that is most OEMs have built businesses around the 3 to 5 year upgrade cycle, ones that rely on the customer replacing their equipment regularly. This paradigm, as I explained, made sense for both consumers and vendors from an economic perspective, as long as the performance gains from each upgrade were significant. But it's not really the case anymore. What has never been considered, however, is the resource consumption of digital technologies and the impact they have on the environment. So what we need to do is we need to move from this linear economy to a circular economy, especially as it relates to the model of IT hardware. Now, hardware that is more modular, repairable, and lasts longer can obviously be serviced better. It can also better incorporate environmental externalities when factoring the overall footprint, such as carbon emissions or resource extraction. Now, as you'll see by this, okay, and it stopped working, go figure. There we go. It's just slow. Sorry about that. Or, no. It's stuck. Well, expect the unexpected. So, I don't know. I hope it'll work eventually, but if not, I can do it without. No? All right. So, not only is it important, sorry, let me just try exiting and trying again. There we go. Now, where was I? Not only is, so I was talking about the circular economy, and something you probably heard a little bit about or whatnot, but obviously when it comes to circularity, reducing or not using is always better than recycling. Not that recycling is bad, recycling is good and it should be encouraged. However, there are things to think about whenever it comes to helping customers make more sustainable choices. So, and that goes in hand, by the way, with new policy and regulation. So a lot of new things that are coming out relate to, for instance, more repairability for IT hardware, longer firmware support. This is especially true in the EU. Of course, we have greater transparency of not just vendors and OEMs, but also throughout the digital sector. And of course, this is being reinforced by new policy, by new regulation. So in other words, it's always better to think about what's coming and try to preempt it. And so, in other words, sustainability is becoming integral to the product life cycle, at least based on new policy. And so we need a circular economy, but how do we do that? How do we accomplish it? And so something that something that is really critical to this is that we have to rethink the business model. We have to rethink the business model for IT hardware, but it is really important to stress that there is still a business in hardware, a profitable one, but it might look different. So a key to unlocking the circular economy for IT hardware lies really in transforming previously seen threats into what I would consider lucrative opportunities, and exciting ones at that. It really begins with the ownership model. So as long as the OEM or the vendor is selling the product to the customer and the customer is owning the product, what is the incentive for the OEM to essentially take care of it? What is the incentive to make it last longer? So while this model may have benefited producers and customers alike in the past, it's not so much the same anymore. And add to this the global supply chain shortages, and we have significant issues with getting new hardware to the people that need it. And that the old model is not necessarily working. Many of you may have seen this. There is a new space for alternatives. Ali Fain, the president of IT Renew, most of you probably know, she stressed earlier this year that the chip shortage itself is driving more companies to secure secondhand hardware for their data centers. In fact, she expressed that it's flying off the shelves. So this just goes to show that as long as customers, that new is not always what's preferred. What's preferred is reliability, cost, and obviously availability. If people need to upgrade, they want to do it now. They don't want to wait till a year from now or 9 months later based on especially supply chains. So what we propose is maybe not something that you've never heard of before. It's IT hardware as a service. And so the idea being that what if the vendor, even a third-party service provider, essentially owned the hardware, was responsible for the hardware, and instead they provided the networks, the computational processes, the storage, et cetera, as a service, similar to software as a service or infrastructure as a service. Then the vendor or service provider would have a clear incentive to maintain, repair, and refurbish, and then extend the life cycle of the hardware as long as possible. And then, of course, the customer would get the insurance that they are getting what they need. Now, it would also turn repairability, long-term service provision, and sustainability into fundamental components of IT hardware. Now, this is something we had made. This is Survey. He's just, or he, she, it. They're just trying to encourage everyone not to throw them away. And in fact, what if we want to keep Survey around longer, there's a few other things that we have to remember. One is that it echoes other viable models. Something similar to this is something like car rental companies. It might seem strange to think about it from a server point of view, but actually it makes a lot of sense. So modifying the business model, modifying the service, it would be beneficial to producers and customers as well, especially, but not just to them. It would also benefit the communities impacted by supply chains, as well as the earth, which I think we can all agree is a pretty good thing. It creates new business opportunities. Now, going back to the economics, because from our opinion, it would create new business opportunities for the vendor itself, for third-party services, but also in licensing. So that's another element to consider. And then lastly, in our view, it would, this model would open a whole new world of flexibility and potentially even more business opportunities for hardware vendors. Now, I'm going to go through this just quite quickly because I want to stress that we actually we wrote an article explaining a lot of this, kind of going more in depth about it, and I definitely suggest that you check it out on our website. I'll put it at the end. But of course, there's 4 key challenges to consider, one of which is the commoditization of server hardware. OCP is doing a great job at helping to standardize that already, so we're kind of getting there. I would say that even though it's number 1, I would say that's one challenge that we are, especially as a community, overcoming. And while this is applicable to environmental sustainability and social sustainability, I would argue it's beneficial to financial sustainability too. because if the business case for sustainability isn't realized, then the sector will continue to drag its feet. So this is one way that we can, for instance, push that financial sustainability. Now, another thing to consider is that it will reshape OEM balance sheets. It will keep the assets on their books if we were to shift to this model, and reduce large fluctuating revenues to more stable, although less income, so lower subscription-based revenues rather. So it's something like a little bit of short-term loss for long-term gain. Oh, sorry. Thanks for bearing with me. This is the first time giving a presentation in 2 years. So as you can imagine, you know, a little bit rusty, and I'm jet lagged. I forgot to mention that, so thank you. Thanks for being kind. Of course, for many of you, it will, you might think it might raise security and data ownership issues. We fully understand that. That's where we think that markets and competition will prevail, i.e., it will require a lot of transparency, but we think that that kind of with more transparency, especially radical transparency in the age of higher customer desire for sustainability, that will actually benefit as opposed to want to stay inside of these closed models. And then very lastly, I would just say it will also pose challenges to research and innovation, but again, we think that that can be overcome. Especially if we're focusing a lot more on modularity. So again, I'm running out of time, so I don't want to cover this too much. And I do encourage you to go check that out if you're interested. And lastly, I just want to close with this, and I know I'm almost at time, and that is that sustainability is good for business. I mean, given the Sustainable Development Agenda, I mean, COP26 is happening right now. The need to change is quick, but I definitely understand that whatever changes happen, they need to make sense for the customer especially, but also they need to make sense from a business level. But sustainability and business do not have to be butting heads. It's like security and privacy. This is a false dichotomy. Same with sustainability and profit. You can have both. It's not impossible. And so as I said, study after study demonstrates that adopting sustainability practices decreases costs while making businesses more competitive. This is especially true if any of you are working for colos. I mean, collective action, grouping your voices together to make this happen, it's really, really necessary to say, yes, we want sustainability. And I would just say, please join us in our efforts to make this a reality. You can see the information up here. We do have a booth. Come by the expo hall tomorrow, the day after. Love to talk more with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We do have 1 minute for questions. Please.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for this. And I think it's a really important topic. I'd like to propose one more challenge to add to your list. So 5 challenges. And that is data about the carbon impacts of the hardware itself. It's incredibly lagging. I do this for a living. It's like 10 years behind the times of the current technology. And how are we going to be able to quantify the carbon savings and other environmental impact savings from doing what you're doing so we can make the sustainability case without the underlying fundamental data? And hardware providers, I am talking to you, but I'm also talking to you.
That's an excellent question, and that's actually one that we're considering as well. So I think I explain it more in the paper itself, but you're absolutely right that the lack of data is hindering so much progress from across the sector because especially when it comes to data centers, we just don't know what's happening. So how can we say, well, this is green or this is sustainable or whatnot if we don't actually know? And so you're right. So the first step to actually realizing what we call our roadmap to sustainable digital infrastructure by 2030 is we need to hold people accountable, and we do that through data. So it is a challenge and one that we're completely on board with, and we agree with you. Thank you. Thank you.
We have another question on sustainability.
Oh, sure. Where? Oh.
So there's you show traditional servers there, but there's a lot of work on disaggregation of a lot of the server functions and pooling them. Do you see that as helping on sustainability, or is that a problem?
That is a very good question. I would say that I'm probably not the best person to answer that. My technical colleague is joining today, and he will be joining me at the booth. And so please do come by and ask him that question. I've been rehearsing that for 2 weeks. Yeah, no, I really do wish I could answer your question, but it's a little over my head. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Michael.